And I hope that you were able to use the data that you gained last Sunday to help someone spread a smile, to communicate better, and bring them up in life. Now, today, we're going to be having a look at the practices and beliefs of the church, having an in-depth look at personal integrity so that we can see how it works for us, and then going a bit deeper into communication and seeing how it takes two to make it work. Now, before we begin with the creed, I would like to go over a word with you, and that word is inalienable. And something that is inalienable is something that cannot be taken away from you or given away by you. That means this is something that is yours and will always be yours. So I want you to think with that as you hear and see the video of the creed of the Church of Scientology. So now with that being said, let's have a look at the creed of the Church of Scientology.
We of the Church believe
that all men of whatever race, color, or creed
were created with equal rights.
That all men have inalienable rights
to their own religious practices and their performance.
That all men have inalienable rights
to their own lives.
That all men have inalienable rights
to their sanity.
That all men have inalienable rights
to their own defense.
That all men have inalienable rights
to conceive, choose, assist, or support
their own organizations, churches, and governments.
That all men have inalienable rights to think freely, to talk freely,
to write freely their own opinions,
and to counter or utter
or write upon the opinions of others.
That all men have inalienable rights to the creation of their own kind.
That the souls of men have the rights of men.
That the study of the mind
and the healing of mentally caused ills
should not be alienated from religion
or condoned in non-religious fields.
And that no agency less than God
has the power to suspend or set aside these rights, overtly or covertly.
And we of the Church believe
that man is basically good,
that he is seeking to survive,
that his survival depends upon himself and upon his fellows,
and his attainment of brotherhood with the universe.
And we of the Church believe
that the laws of God forbid man
to destroy his own kind,
to destroy the sanity of another,
to destroy or enslave another's soul,
to destroy or reduce the survival of one's companions or one's group.
And we of the Church believe
that the spirit can be saved, and that the spirit alone may save or heal the body.
Now those were the beliefs of the church. And with these beliefs, you see that you have inalienable rights that cannot be taken away from you. And if those are tried to be taken away from you, you should fight. Fight against it. So, what does personal integrity have to do with that? Or with life in general? Let's have a look at personal integrity and see how this can be applied on a daily basis. Personal Integrity by L. Ron Hubbard. What is true for you is what you have observed yourself. And when you lose that, you have lost everything. What is personal integrity? Personal integrity is knowing what you know. What you know is what you know. And to have the courage to know and say what you have observed. And that is integrity. And there is no other integrity. So, you knowing what you know. Think of some things that you know for certain are. It could be your name, your position, the planet that we live on, the country that you reside in, your parents. These are things that you know because you've observed these things and you have the courage to speak on what it is that you know. Now, of course, we can talk about honor, truth, all these things, these esoteric terms. But I think they'd all be covered very well if what we really observed was what we observed. That we took care to observe what we were observing, and that we always observed to observe. So really taking time to look and analyze something for what it truly is, and not looking through a glass cloud, or not trying to look at data that someone gave you to look at the thing that you're observing. No, just looking at that thing that is what it is. And not necessarily maintaining a skeptical attitude, a critical attitude, or an open mind, but certainly maintaining sufficient personal integrity and sufficient personal belief and confidence in self and courage that we can observe what we observe and say what we have observed. Nothing in Dianetics and Scientology is true for you unless you have observed it, and it is true according to your observation. That is all. Now, using personal integrity in your day-to-day life, especially when it comes to interpersonal relationships and communication, there's lots of times where data just gets spewed out on you. You have to make a conscious decision or an effort to observe that data and see it for what it truly is with the data that you already have. Is it true? Does it work for you? Does it not? If it doesn't, you throw it away in the bin. If it does, then all right, you've observed something that is true for you. Now, with that being said, on the basis of communication, last week we went over some of the basic fundamentals that are needed when communicating with others, ways that you can get into communication with someone. But now we're going to see how is it that communication takes two, and what are the roles that one needs to play when communicating. And with that, I'm going to be calling upon some friends to help me with this demonstration. I'll introduce them to you. This is Joe, and this is Bill. Let us begin. Two-way communication. Communication is the single most important item or object in this or any other universe. With communication is created space, energy, and time itself. And the only way that anybody gets stuck into anything is by a failure to complete something known as the cycle of communication. Now, a cycle is something that has a beginning and a middle, which is the continuation of that thing, and it has an end. So it has a beginning, continuation, and an end. So this would be a cycle of communication. Communication that has a beginning, continuation, and an end. The cycle of communication is a very quick thing to look at. There's hardly anything to it. Let us say Bill is the originator. He walks up and he says, "How are you?" And Joe, the person addressed, hears this and he says, "I'm fine." And Bill receives that. So this could be a communication. Bill gives it to Joe. Joe receives it, and he gives communication back to Bill. Bill receives it. That would be the communication cycle. That communication, having been gone through with Joe, says, "Well, how are you?" And Bill receives it and says rather unimaginatively, "I'm fine." And Joe acknowledges it. So we have cycle 1 and cycle 2. In both cases, we had origin. We had receipt point. We had an answer and we had an acknowledgement. It doesn't matter what was said as long as the two-way cycle of communication is uniformly carried through. Bill comes along and he originates communication. He has interchanged it, talked to Joe and gotten an answer back. Then Joe originates the communication and is answered back by Bill. And they can talk. They actually theoretically could talk for 100,000 years as long as they followed these rules. And the second they break these rules or any part of these rules, they get into a misalignment with each other and they get upset. And you get different types of personalities that react differently on communication line. They could talk this way for 100,000 years and it wouldn't matter what they said. They could sit there and Bill would say, "You know, you're the lousiest, scurviest dog I've ever met, Joe." And Joe hears this and he says, "Well, that's your opinion." And Bill would say, "Mm-hmm." And then Joe could say to him, I've seen swindlers in my time. I've had some fellows who've done every single crime in the calendar and multiplied them across the line, but you are very easily are the scummiest of them all. And Bill could say, that's what you think. And Joe could reply, And they could go on this way, on, and be in a horrible temper with each other, and they'd all of a sudden find out that they weren't really mad at each other anymore. But Bill can walk up to Joe, and he can say to himself, that's a nice fellow, Joe there. I'll say hello to Joe. So he'll say, well, how are you, Joe? And Joe hears him, and he doesn't say a thing. And the next thing you know, Bill will break his neck one of these times. This can go on just so many months or years, and one of these days, why Bill can be certain to break his neck. But at the same time, Bill will find that he looks at Joe longer and longer and sticks around more and more. Insidious, huh? A lack of a cycle sticks Bill to Joe. And we see Joe still has the communication. Bill is just waiting. Has it ever happened to you? Now, we try to find out how this works in real life. Believe me, it works in real life. And you can take a family, you can take the person in the family who is least following these communication cycles and find right there the person who is causing the rest of the family to be screwy. We look at a marriage, and this fellow says, Your Honor, I didn't do a thing to her. I was always a quiet fellow, and I minded my own business. I worked my job, I brought home my wages every Saturday night, did everything I could to make a good home for her. Your Honor, and then she ran off with the chauffeur. It's not my fault, is it? And Your Honor says to the girl, Did you do this? And the girl, not knowing anything about the laws of communication, having no argument in her defense, says, Yes, I did. So she is deprived of home and of mother, or whatever they do in courts these days. And yet the truth of the matter was that this was what went on in the family. She'd get up in the morning and fix his breakfast. He'd get up, sit down at the table, and she'd say, Well, Bill, how are you? How are you this morning? And isn't it a beautiful morning? And I've just made some hotcakes here, especially for you. Nothing. He walks out the door in the morning and she says, Goodbye, dear. Nothing. He comes home in the evening. She walks up to him. She gets him his slippers, his pipe, gets his paper, has a snack before supper, all set, and says, Well, dear, did you have a nice day? Nothing. And she put up with this for 4 years before she ran off with the chauffeur. Why? Because at first, she stuck harder and harder and harder, waiting for the answer. Just waiting for the answer. That's all she wanted. He could have said, Go to blazes! And it would have been a perfectly valid answer. At least he was alive. And for the first 2-3 years, she was simply waiting for the answer and waiting for the answer. And then she inverted, which is going through a complete reversal, to the point where she knew darn well she wasn't going to get an answer. And instead of sticking to, she started to fly away from. You get the idea? People will come in just so hard and so close on no communication that they'll invert and they'll start to get away from things that won't answer them. But it takes quite a while for the cycle to run. So eventually, there is nothing else she could do but run away with the chauffeur. Who's the offender? Well, that's a question for the jurisprudence to answer, not us. But out of all the data on the human mind, there's not much varied data that is very important. There are easily 50,000 separate phenomena, all of which were well worth cataloging. But out of all these 50,000 phenomena, the phenomena given here opens the door to what we call auditing. All we are interested in is ability. Can a person live better? Can they have a freer life? Can they have a better understanding of existence? Knowing these various rules about communication, once an individual has been audited along this line, it's impossible to trap him. Such as the likes of Bill, still stuck in a communication cycle that has never ended. So, have you ever experienced something like that? You gave a communication to someone and they did not give you an answer. And you just kind of waited for the answer. Even when you got home, you thought about the fact that, oh wow, this person never answered my question or never responded to me. That's the power of the breaking of the two-way communication cycle. So, as you see, it takes two. You can learn more about communication by reading the booklet, Communication, or the more comprehensive Scientology handbook. It contains many of L. Ron Hubbard's discoveries on this subject and shows you how to use them to live a better life. Now, let's look at what's happening this week. Yesterday, a few volunteers went out to the Daughter Park to do a cleanup, and luckily, there were no lawnmowers found. But a total of 5 bags of rubbish were collected with the help of locals also stepping in to take action. The Dublin Council will be picking up the bags to dispose of them. But it shows that if you take action and make something happen, you just may receive help following behind you. It only takes one pebble to drop inside of a pond to create massive ripples. Now, there are more factors that would cause for communication to go awry. And those will be discussed Tuesday at 8 o'clock at Vincent Kelly's webinar on interpersonal relationships. Please check the page for more information on that webinar, Tuesday, 8 o'clock. Next week, we're going to be going over the true story of Scientology. So, what is the true story? And why so much hearsay? Well, next week, you're going to find out. And that's all for the announcements. And now, we'll be ending the Sunday service with the closing prayer. Join with me in the reading, as it's going to be showing up on your screen. The Scientology prayer for total freedom. May the author of the universe enable all men to reach an understanding of their spiritual nature. May awareness and understanding of life expand so that all may come to know the author of the universe. And may others also reach this understanding, which brings total freedom. At this time, we think of those whose liberty is threatened, of those who suffered imprisonment for their beliefs, of those who are enslaved or martyred, and for all those who are brutalized, trapped, or attacked. We pray that human rights will be preserved so that all people may believe and worship freely, so that freedom will once again be seen in our land. Freedom from war and poverty and want. Freedom to be, freedom to do, and freedom to have. Freedom to use and understand man's potential, a potential that is God-given and God-like. And freedom to achieve that understanding and awareness that is total freedom. May God let it be so. Thank you for coming to Sunday service. I hope that you can use this data that you've heard today to make an improvement in your life. I look forward to seeing you next week, and have a great one.
Reality is me. Reality